Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for waiting. We had some technical difficulties, but alhamdulillah, everything is fine. So Bismillah will start. Alhamdulillah, wassalatu ala Muhammad Rasulillah. So inshallah, today is the fifth session, and we have seen, we said that this is Kitab al-Ibar. It's only the introduction of Kitab al-Ibar. In fact, technically the introduction and the first book. And we have seen three sections or three chapters of the first book. Today we are going to see inshallah the fourth one. And the fourth one is في العمران الحضري والبلدان والأمصار. So after speaking before about Al-Umran al-Badawi, which is basically the sociology of rural people and how they interact, he talked then, he went to talk about statecraft. And only now he came back to Al-Umran al-Hadari, meaning, shall we say, the sociology of urban life. And he will be talking about cities and countries. Now, and this order, in fact, is purposeful, and we'll understand that once we start this chapter. And this chapter, it has 22 sections. And he will start from the very beginning, which is فصل في أن الدول أقدم من المدن والأمصار وأنها إنما توجد ثانية عن الملك. And so what he's saying basically that states are older than cities. States are older than cities. نعم. And this is very interesting. This is something that archaeologists and anthropologists discuss on a regular basis, especially in introductory courses. And we have already talked about what's called sometimes social complexity, meaning we talked about how humanity, when it comes to numbers and some kind of shall we say, some kind of a social evolution, that you have what's called bands, which are very small groups. Then you have tribes, which is much bigger. Then you have confederation of tribes. Then after that, people start talking about the rise of states. What's interesting here is Ibn Khaldūn is relating states with cities, and he's making the almost maybe unexpected correlation that states existed before cities. And to relate it back again to archaeology, this discussion also comes in archaeology in what's called, when we are talking about prehistory, and especially the period that's called Neolithic. And if you are, whether you are familiar or not with prehistory, so Neolithic is the latest and the most recent portion of prehistory, right before the beginning of writing and written record and documents that we have. So the Neolithic is the most recent and in a sense is the most recognizable. So archaeologists and anthropologists, so there is the Neolithic. Before that, what's called so Neolithic basically means neo, so new, lithic meaning stone. So basically it's the new stone age. Now before it is what's called the Mesolithic, which is the middle part, then the Paleolithic, which is the oldest and the biggest when it comes to chronology. But the Neolithic is the most recognizable, and people, when they try to distinguish, so generally speaking, the Neolithic goes back about 10,000 years, roughly. And it depends on the area, and the oldest Neolithic tested is in the Middle East. And for example, in Europe, you can't talk about the Neolithic before 7,000 years, meaning it's more recent. It took about 3,000 years, according to modern archaeology, for the Neolithic the period to move, shall we say, from the Middle East to Europe. Now, archaeologists, when they are digging, they are finding artifacts or material finds. They want to know, how do you distinguish between whether are you dealing with Neolithic or something before that? So generally speaking, they talk about certain criteria. For example, pottery. clay, pottery, like ceramic, basically. And another criteria is what's called the agriculture. Okay, if you have agriculture, for example, you have seeds that are clearly domesticated or domesticated animals, you know that you are dealing already with the Neolithic. So you have also, so we talked about pottery. So pottery is very, very, very ubiquitous, shall we say, in archaeological sites. It's one reason it's very easily conserved, and it also now, especially, it's very easily dated. You can find the chronology quite easily, and so it's a very useful material. So we said pottery, we talked about agriculture and cities. You have cities, or at least towns. Supposedly one of the oldest towns, if not the oldest, is Jericho in what's now the Palestinian territories. And I am mentioning it because these criteria, they don't have to be all together in one site for you to label it as Neolithic. Because, for example, in Jericho, you have what appears to be basically a town, but you don't have ceramic. So, to the point that it's called oddly pre-pottery Neolithic. There is a not a counter argument, a counter example that happens in Japan, where you have ceramic, but you don't have, it's technically, you have ceramic, but before agriculture. In Japan, you have ceramic before agriculture. So they don't nicely go together all the time with each other. Now, let's go back to Ibn Khaldūn. So Ibn Khaldūn is, shall we say, participating in this discussion, obviously very early on, and he's making this connection that cities demand, or rather states demand cities, and they are before cities. Now, and he will explain, he gives various reasons why he believes that. Part of it, for example, he will be talking, obviously Ibn Khaldūn studied the usul, so he said city life is not daruriyat, so people don't have to live in cities. But for you to, for example, especially when you want to build a city, you plan it and you start building it. He said only a state has the capacity to do that. Of course, we are talking about pre-industrial societies. And he will continue. So for about 4 or 5 sub-chapters, he will talk about cities. For example, we'll go to the second one. الملك يدعو إلى نزول الأمطار, نزول الأمصار. So how kingship demand that residency and either building cities or taking residency in cities. It's really hard to imagine a state without a capital city. Now, then he noticed, for example, in the third one, المدن العظيمة والهياكل المرتفعة إنما يشيدها الملك الكثير. He said that great cities and magnificent monuments, they demand by default that some kind of a kingship is involved. And this is something he will, for us, it might be a little bit easy to understand. But for example, he was countering another argument. He said, for example, these massive buildings, because for sometimes he will say that some people thought that these massive buildings must have been built by people who had, who were much taller than we are, for example, much stronger. And for him, he said, no, that's not the case. However, if you have a number of people, and to coordinate a number of people, you need kingship, and you follow that with technology, you can do that. And he gives other arguments why. Similar concept, he will just give us an advice about what to do if we want to build cities, meaning how to choose the location. You have to be you have accessibility to water, and for that time accessibility to grazing areas, not too far from agriculture, and so forth. And he will give counter examples with cities, he said, that collapsed exactly because they didn't respect these criteria. Now, I will come back to things related to that, but I would like to move to something a little bit different. So Ibn Khaldūn, he will start when talking about the cities. He will start talking. He will go back to aspects of the economy, and he will let us know that there is that when cities are not all the same, and he will rank cities depending on the size. And he said that will explain to you the prosperity and the prices in each city. And generally speaking, he will say two things. You have to distinguish between necessities, the commodities that are, for example, like grains, and luxurious items. And he said, generally speaking, for luxurious items, they tend to be um, um, not in demand in smaller cities, and they are not too expensive. For example, rents, and rents is not luxury, but he gives you just an idea that's a little bit related to that. However, the commodities are much cheaper in bigger cities. I would like to go back to something, and I will go back to 18, and here I have a text that I would like that we'll spend some time on it, because it summarizes very nicely his theory, how people start from Badawa, from in a rural lifestyle, and they move progressively to a sedentary lifestyle, and how the state comes on the back of that. And however, what he will say, that that's only half of the cycle. That once city life gets established and the state gets established, something happened. And he will compare that to the life of a human being, which we talked about, but he will talk specifically about the life of a human being that is in shall we say, mid-age. So I will be reading and translating, inshallah, and if we have questions, we'll deal with that. Now, and this key text is in the chapter called الحضارة غاية العمران ونهاية لعمره وأنها مؤذنة بفساده. So city life, especially in major cities, is the ultimate goal of al-Umran, which we said that people coming together for a social life, and that it is ونهاية لعمره, it is the ultimate, it's the pinnacle of a human society, in meaning living together. However, أنها مؤذنة بفساد. However, it's an indication that corruption will start on shall we say, quite a massive scale, unless something is done. Otherwise, it will finish. So he starts, قد بينا لك فيما سلف أن الملك والدولة غاية للعصبية. So we have clarified for you, in what we have said before, that kingship and statehood is the ultimate result of al-asabiyya, which is group solidarity. وأن الحضارة غاية البداوة, and that city life is the ultimate goal, meaning if you go in, shall we say, in a progressive manner, for badawa, which is rural life, and especially before when it is mobile. Although we said badawa is both mobile but also rural, as in agriculture. So he gives you two rules so far. وأن العمران كله من بداوة وحضارة وملك وسوق له عمر محسوس. And that this communal life, whether it is rural or urban, whether it has kingship, whether we are talking about kingship or suqa, that's meaning for commoners له عمر محسوس. It has a lifespan. So it has a lifespan. So basically there is a cycle. Then he said كما أن للشخص الواحد من الأشخاص المكونات عمرا محسوسا, exactly like an individual human being. وتبين في المعقول والمنقول أن الأربعين للإنسان غاية في تزايد قواه ونموها. And he said that by reason and also by studying text, he means here obviously Quran and Hadith, that generally speaking the 40 for a human being after is the ultimate time for his growth both physically and mentally. وأنه إذا بلغ سن الأربعين وقفت الطبيعة عن أثر النشوء والنمو برهة. And after that the person starts to slow down. Okay, first he said there is as if you stop a little bit. ثم تأخذ في الانحطاط, then it starts to go down. فلتعلم أن الحاضرة في العمران أيضا كذلك. And here you should know that shall we say civilization or city life in communal life for human beings is also like that. لأنه غاية لا مزيد وراءها, because there is nothing in this evolution, shall we say, there is nothing beyond that. وأن الترف والنعمة إذا حصل لأهل العمران دعاهم طبعه إلى مذاهب الحاضرة والتخلق بعوائدها. This is something a little bit new, although we have seen something similar to it, that when you have this established city life, what happens, there is a tendency for luxury, and that once people get used to them, they start believing that they are necessities, and they start التخلق بعوائدها, and they start getting used to it. والحضارة كما علمت هي التفنن في الترف واستجادة أحواله. And city life, established city life, as you know, is when people start being very creative in luxurious lifestyles and seeking all kind of that. والكلف بالصنائع التي تؤنق من أصنافه, and they will start to be keen in all industries or ways that will help them excel in all of its types. وسائر فنونه من الصنائع المهيئة للمطابخ. He's being specific now. Even things like cooking, people will become very elaborate about them. أو الملابس, clothes and fashion. أو المباني, architecture. أو الفروش أو الآنية, or furniture and such needs. ولسائر أحوال المنزل, and everything related to houses. والتأنق في كل واحد من هذه الصنائع وللتأنق في كل واحد من هذه صنائع كثيرة. And to excel in every type that we mention, you need a lot of industries. لا يحتاج إليها عند البداوة, that are not, that people in rural life, they have no need for them. Because وعدم التأنق فيها, because that's not their lifestyle. نعم. Because as he said, they are focused on الضروريات, they are focused by default on the necessities. وإذا بالغ التأنق في هذه الأحوال المنزلية للغاية تبعه طاعة الشهوات. And this is also, he will say that when people, they reach this level where they try to have a very easy, luxurious life, what happens, it will affect them morally. تبعه طاعة الشهوات. They will start following their desires. فتتلون النفس من تلك العوائد بألوان كثيرة لا يستقيم حالها معها في دينها ولا دنياها. And he said, and this, once they get used to it and they start following their desires, both their deen gets threatened and their dunya gets threatened. And then he will explain. So, and he will explain collectively and individually, and dunya, meaning, shall we say, especially the economy, and deen, also we'll talk about it. So وبيانه أن المصر, so here مصر here he means a major city, بالتفنن في الحضارة تعظم نفقات أهلها. So a very established city life, it has a lot of expenses which become perceived as necessary. And he said it is exactly at that time that you will notice وهو زمن وضع المكوس في الدولة لكثرة خرجها. And it's exactly at that time that states will start putting taxes, meaning additional taxes. Why? Because it has a lot of expenses. لكثرة خرجها. Kharj here, it means expenses. So that's, and he said, obviously, when the city, when the states start doing that, a lot of injustices will naturally follow. So that's collectively. Personally, وأما فساد أهلها واحدا واحدا على الخصوص فمن الكد والتعب في حاجات العوائد. So personally, that because of the rising expenses, which are now perceived as necessities, there will be more effort, الكد والتعب, exhaustion, to these new habits, which are perceived as basically necessities. However, what that promotes, it promotes والتلون بألوان الشر في تحصيلها. People start being not very cautious in how they gain their income. وما يعود على النفس من الضرر في تحصيلها, and that will affect them morally. بحصول لون آخر من ألوانها, and it leads to even greater harm morally. فلذلك يكثر منهم الفسق والشر والسفسفة والتحيل. That's why you will see that in established cities you have الفسق, sin is common amongst them. الشر, you can either translate it as bad behavior or even evil. والسفسفة والتحيل على تحصيل المعاش, and they start being pretty much, they don't care much how they gain their income. من وجهه ومن غير وجهه, whether it is lawful or unlawful, meaning especially morally. نعم, he will continue. ثم تجدهم, so for him, as you see, that luxury is leading progressively to the corruption of the communal life and of personal life. ثم تجدهم أبصر بطرق الفسق ومذاهبه والمجاهرة بهم, and you will see them, especially if you compare them with the rural areas, they are more experts in ways of sin, and it's ومذاهبه, its styles, and والمجاهرة به. This is a little bit new, and they are open about it. So their sins, they are not hiding them anymore. نعم. And about this last point, he will elaborate on it. ومن مفاسد الحضارة, so one of the bad things that established city life and civilization provokes is الانهماك في الشهوات, meaning that people will be following their desires. والاسترسال فيها, and they will go deep in them. لكثرة الترف, because of a luxurious lifestyle, meaning these people, they are not fighting for daily bread. That's pretty much secured. In fact, in another about that point, hopefully we can come back to it, when he was comparing big cities with small cities, and he said that the daruriyat, the necessities, the commodities that are basic, he said they become very cheap. In the bigger the city, the more work it has, the more specialty, the more the basics are covered. And he said something quite interesting, and he said, had it been not for monopoly, these people, they can give the basic needs for food for everyone for free. So in the city, the state becomes that rich. So the necessities are basically covered. Now, the bad side about that is that people are following luxury, and that favors, as he said, al-inhimak fi shahawat, meaning following desires without restraint. والاسترسال فيها لكثرة الترف فيقع التفنن في شهوات البطن. So people will be very artistic and creative in all kind of شهوات البطن. So basically related to food من المآكل والملاذ. So very advanced cuisines are part of that. ويتبع ذلك التفنن في شهوات الفرج بأنواع المناكح. And he said something very interesting. And that also, so of course, he's talked about shahawat al-batn, the desires which are basically related to food. Then he said التفنن في شهوات الفرج بأنواع المناكح. Then morally, people will not be restricted to basically, shall we say, marriage, because their sexual desires, they don't really care. He said من الزنا واللواط. So two things, there will be adultery will be common, and homosexuality. And فيفضي ذلك إلى فساد النوع, and that will lead to the corruption of that human society, basically. And so as you see, there is for him there is some kind of an evolution, and there is a trap for in every period. Of course, as we said, these rules that Ibn Khaldūn gave he means them as general rules. They are general rules. Naam, meaning that, because for example, sometimes when a society reaches this level, sometimes the luxury, for example, before reaching 100%, when they are at 90%, they might be attacked, something happened, things change. But this is the cycle that Ibn Khaldūn sees in history, and he's presenting it as he believes it is. Now, and here when he talked about this, he used an ayah from the Quran, and he said that will help you understand this ayah, which is in green there. وَإِذَا أَرَدْنَا أَن نُهْلِكَ قَرْيَةً أَمَرْنَا مُتْرَفِيهَا فَفَسَقُوا فِيهَا فَحَقَّ عَلَيْهِمُ الْقَوْلُ فَدَمَّرْنَاهَا تَدْمِيرًا. And you can see that in this ayah there is the word mutraf, which he uses consistently, at-taraf, luxurious lifestyle. Now, and today I would maybe I will take questions before I add more, inshallah. Either from the audience here, or perhaps from people who are attending online.
Sorry, when you're talking about the prehistoric times,
yes,
and before writing, how do like drawings and things on the walls of caves, how does that fall into that time period?
Drawings, they can be either prehistory or after, meaning sometimes for certain communities, all that we know from their past is, for example, caves, and they are drawings there. So that we know for sure that it's before any written system was in that area or that continent. There are other ones that know they're after. So it's not related necessarily to writing. No. Anthropologists, the theory is writing systems are shall we say, our natural progress. They evolved from pictures. And the arguments used, for example, for example, in fact, the alphabet that we use, whether in English or Arabic, in fact, they're sister, both of them go back to Phoenicians. And Phoenician is, in fact, now related to a form that itself came from hieroglyphics. So you have the Egyptian hieroglyphics. Then you have in the Sinai, there is a script that is a simplification of that, but from where the Phoenicians took it, then it goes to La and other ways now. And so, but if you see hieroglyphs, you can see that they are pictures. Now, another case is, for example, the Chinese script. Until now, it's very clear, a number of them, they are originally pictures. So that's how archaeologists see they call it evolution, the evolution of the script. So you have pictures, then you have standardized pictures, then you have those pictures, for example, for example, words that, for example, the word, let's say the word in Arabic, ayn, the word eye. Or let's give an English example, although it's not really true. For example, the word, for example, if they used to the word sea, it could be either the verb to see, or it could be the, shall we say, the ocean. Yeah? So that's how you move from one to another. And we know specific cases where this happened. No, by default, Neolithic there is no script yet. Yes. So, yeah. Once we have scripts, that's history. So that's the phases. That's the, what they call it, the periodization. Nam.
So I kept thinking about in the United States, for example, 1920s were the Roaring 20s, and when people started to fall into sin and openly sin and things like that, the thing that brought them back was the fact that there was a bit depression. But if we look throughout history in the United States, every time there's a depression, I get the feeling that there's less of people turning back to original moral values. So does Ibn Khaldūn provide some type of a solution to say, once you're fallen into this trap, what leaders or what people need to do to get out of it as a city as a whole?
Well, generally speaking, he said that we'll see that what happens is that the city or the state, they become very weak, or the dynasty, because especially at that time he's talking mainly about dynasties. The dynasty will become very weak, and it's generally speaking at that time that another asabiya, another dynasty will come. They will be either conquered or just sometimes within, but if the state as itself remains, another branch of the same dynasty will take over. So it's a weak moment for the state and the dynasty, and it's a time for change. Yeah. And he said, yes, some of them will collapse completely. Some of them, something happens and it will save the day.
We have an online question.
Naam.
Regarding the class structure in cities, what about the poor of the city who may resemble the life of rural folks who don't have much luxury, hard work, or working for food and rent? Does Ibn Khaldūn discuss class distinctions in cities elsewhere?
Could you read the question again, inshallah?
So regarding the class structure in cities,
Naam.
what about the poor of the city who may resemble the life of rural folk people? Does Ibn Khaldūn discuss class distinctions in cities?
Does Ibn Khaldūn discuss class distinction in cities? He's definitely aware of them, and he talks that, for example, that when the tough times come, it's usually the poor that are more prone to suffering more. But does he? I don't recall that he has a very elaborate, at least so far, a very elaborate discussion of classes and as in a Marxist term. I don't remember that. Yes. No. So I will go to the last. If we have no more questions, I will go to the last section of this of this chapter before I can talk more about things that we have seen in general terms. Then he will. The last one is he dedicated it to the language of people in cities. And here he spent a lot of time speaking specifically about the Arabic language. And he said that when it comes to the Arabic language, first of all, he said, he let us know that he's talking about in his time. So the basically 14th century. He died in Hijra, he died in 808. So that will be the 8th century mostly. He will say that know that the languages that are spoken now, the Arabic languages that are now spoken in cities are not, we know it by now, of course, is not Fusha. They are two different phenomena. And he will, and he said, and he will start explaining why. And one reason, he said, obviously, is that the original people who spoke the Arabic language, obviously, when they spread outside, shall we say, especially Arabia, most of them, especially in the beginning, they went, when they established themselves in cities, and of course by interacting with other people who are not native speakers, and they were slowly becoming a minority. Even if the language survived, it didn't survive in its completeness, in its fullness. For example, al-i'rab, the cases, the mansub, the marfu', they disappeared, which is a simplification. Okay, and so that's one reason. And another reason he said is that, and here I will regress a little. I will go back to something. He talked, before talking specifically about the Arabic language, he presented us why he thinks languages either they dominate or they disappear. For cities, he said, generally speaking, the norm is that the language of the city is either the language of the founders or ultimately the language of the dominant group. And he said, when he moved to talk specifically about the Arabic language, he said Arabic language spread with Islam, and especially in his time, he said now, especially in cities, and he talks that they are dominant in, which is similar, almost similar to what we have now. So he talked about Sham, so the Levant, especially Syria. He talks about Egypt, about Iraq, and North Africa. In his time, he added also Al-Andalus. And for him, that was because, of course, first of all, there are two elements. There is what we may call a physical element, because at that time, that was the dominant power. And so, and most of the people, the early Muslims, they were Arabs. So their language became the default language of new cities or the places where they dominated. That's number one. Number two, he said, is that obviously the Arabic, especially Fusha, is the language of Quran and that in itself has favored its conservation, even if when other nations took over. And what he means by that, for example, when Turkic nations, or Muslim, they took over a lot of, especially in the east, or for example, or other groups like in North Africa, where the dominant tribes were Berber or Amazigh. He said even when they took over, yes, the language might have suffered a little bit, but they still kept it and an official status, because that was the language of of Quran and Sunnah. And he said, compare that with what happened in places like what we call now Iran. He said the Arabic language was very much alive there. In fact, perhaps that's hinted by the number of scholarly books that we have from that time, including literature and whatnot. He said it was very much alive. However, not only it basically disappeared, and for his reason is this: is that first, if the nations that took over, they were Muslim nations, that would have happened. What would have happened will be like what happened in Egypt or North Africa, meaning the Arabic would still survive. But what happened, he said, with the Mongols, when the Mongols originally, they were not Muslim. When they attacked, for example, Iraq, and before Iraq, they reached Iraq, for example, Iran and Khorasan and whatnot, he said that pretty much gave, there was no reason for Arabic to survive anymore. So that's his general idea about the language in Al-Amsar. I will perhaps take another question or so before I can move to something else, inshallah.
Could you repeat the point of why the language was, I guess, diluted or lost? In Egypt specifically, you said there's two reasons, because they were taken over?
For Egypt, for example, when Turkic dynasties, they will take over, but they were still Muslim. So he compared that what the Mongols did in Central Asia, for example. So not only the ethnic elements was not in power, the religious element also disappeared. And he said that just almost, not all completely, almost uprooted the language. No. Of course, there are other reasons that we are presenting mainly his ideas. But for example, in things that he doesn't talk about, is that the areas where the Arabic language spread, which is basically the Levant, North Africa, in Egypt. What happened in those areas, what people who study the linguists notice, that Arabic spread very easily in places where the local languages are from the same family as Arabic. So for example, North Africa, you have Berber, all kind of they are still Berber and Coptic language. Both of them are the same branch. Both of them are they are what used to be called so the big branch is called Afro-Asiatic language, which include what we call Semitic languages like Arabic, obviously. And the second, the sister branch, shall we say, that's right after that, is Sometimes they are called اللغات الحامية, but the people no longer make this distinction. So Coptic, Berber, Arabic are the same family. Meaning, of course, especially the audience, they all know Arabic. For example, they all have the three-root system. They all have the three-root system. So a native speaker of any of these language, they easily, they are much at ease at using Arabic, because they don't have to learn, for example, the three-root system. They have it in their own language. So that facilitates the spread of Arabic amongst commoners. We are not talking about scholars. No? So that's another reason. What he didn't mention, but we can't expect him to mention everything. No.
I have one more question here.
Yes.
Is there historic evidence to support that Arabic was widely spoken outside of the scholarly communities in places such as Iran? Is Ibn Khaldūn basically asserting that Arabic was a dominant language in Iran pre-Mongols, even amongst the common folk?
Now, Ibn Khaldūn, of course, when he speaks about places that basically he never visited, so obviously we have to be cautious. Okay, we have to be cautious, and especially now. However, what he might have had in mind, so there were some major tribal migrations that were located, but they tend to be localized in Mawara an-Nahr, in places, certain places even in Afghanistan. But for example, until now, I mean, it pretty much Arabic almost died out in those areas. But you do have native speakers. Very little now, very little. It's very rare. But you had an ethnic presence. It was not, for example, in a place like Iran, which is historically a massive country when it comes to population. And I don't, obviously, they were not demographically the majority. Okay. However, in certain cities, they definitely had a much more greater presence, especially where the ethnic, the population, usually at that time they were really armies and their families were present. Now, but obviously, once again, Ibn Khaldūn, he's definitely a brilliant thinker, but he sometimes he might overstate things because he has never been there. No. For example, he does make these conclusions. For example, let me give you another example that's found very interesting. For example, when he was criticizing people who think that the massive old monuments were built by massive people, okay, he will give very rational arguments. Okay, no, this can be done. For example, he said, if you go to the archaeological sites, we call them archaeological, to the sites of Thamud, you will see that in those massive buildings, the doors are the size of normal human beings. It sounds very, very, very convincing. Then he criticized them further. He said, and those people who have these wild claims, sometimes they talk about such people, and he gives us a very specific name. It seems some kind of a legend that used to be at that time. He said that so-and-so was so tall that he will catch like whales from the sea, and he will grill them in the sun. Okay, he will say this is ridiculous. Okay, makes sense. Then he said, by the way, the sun in itself is not hot. And the idea is this, because he say something like this: the further you go up, the higher in the mountains, whatnot, what happens? It becomes colder. And he said the heat that we have here is more of because of the shall we say, it's like a greenhouse effect, meaning it's something localized. Obviously, we are not going to agree with him, especially at this time. But it just tells you that yes, is very methodical. He has a methodology, very clear cut and reasonable. but he still lived in a certain time. So obviously, he will do mistakes here and there. Nam, any other questions, inshallah? There was in this chapter and the chapter before, sometimes for example, what I try to present is just the general ideas and the theories that and the hypothesis that he espoused, but occasionally he almost start a topic and he's just too interested, and he will be more of a historian. This is what happened, this is what happened, and he goes on, meaning without theory or very little. Okay, in this section he did it about when he was talking about cities, he talked about the sixth subchapter, al-masajid wal-buyut al-azima fil alam. So here you will be talking basically about the history of al-Kaaba and the history of Bayt al-Maqdis and the history of al-Masjid al-Nabawi, which are mainly, so I didn't mention that. And in the previous chapter also, he will there was a historical section when he talked about the Khulafa al-Rashidun and so forth. So I in a sense I tried to avoid that, but he spoke about it because I would like to focus and to give you an idea about how he thinks, because he said in the very beginning there are rules for history and you have to be aware of them, and so inshallah that's what I focused on. So for today, that will be inshallah basically it until unless you have further question. I'm sorry for today, we had to start a little bit late and we finished a little bit late. So if you don't have questions, so next time inshallah it will be basically the economy. في المعاش ووجوبه من الكسب والصنائع. Thank you very much and salam alaikum.
Dr.
There is a su'al, there is a question?
Yeah, there's one question. Many Mufassirun did assert that some of the ancients before the time of Sayyid Nuh were giants. Does Ibn Khaldūn explicitly discuss those in the context of Quranic prehistorical people?
No, he was specifically speaking about very specific examples. No, he didn't discuss that. Okay, he said in these examples, because he will go, if you go to their buildings which still exist, he was talking about Thamud specifically. Okay, that you'll see their the gates and so forth. Okay, that being said, even for Thamud, we are not sure that Thamud are a little bit historically known, and we have texts, and there is a language called the Thematic language that is deciphered, so we are more familiar with them, assuming that they are the same group. No. But anyway, Ibn Khaldūn was very specific about a very specific example. No. Thank you, Salam.